between the decision rules that were kind of built into, or taught to you about factor analysis, and kind of eyeballing the data and what you thought was going to be there to begin with, you decide that there's one factor of interest here, you decide that there's 3 or 4 factors of interest here, and then you will also get print out another table that says factor 1 loads on, which isn't exactly the same as correlating with, but for our purposes you can say correlates with each of these original measures that you had with such and such an amount. Usually people again will have like a cutoff that they tend to use. One of the ways that articles differ, one of the things you can critique papers on if you want to critique what people do with their factor analysis data, is people will have different cutoffs. And some people set the cutoff as low as 0.3. Some people set it as high as 0.5. A lot of variation there in what you're going to end up with in terms of what loads and factors. And then you have this purely creative moment. Really, it is. It's you look at this table and you say, okay, factor 1 loads on the following 4 or 5 tests. Therefore, I'm going to call it blank and say this is active coping. I'm going to call it acceptance coping. Maybe they have a different stance in life and a different theoretical bent. Maybe I call the acceptance coping factor spiritual coping. Depending what loads on it. So, and people, you can at least frequently, and maybe almost always, look at those factor loadings and those scales loaded on that factor and come up with a different name for the factor than whoever did the original analysis. And people, a fairly common thing that people do is that they will take a measure that in fact is mostly loading on negatively worded items and scales, or has negative correlations with positively worded scales, and give it a positive name. So, for example, Hal Lawton, one of the editors in one of your books, has a measure that's called the caregiver satisfaction measure. If you actually look at the items, all the items on it are worded in the direction of how bad caregiving is. But you say, well, because it's a latent variable, you can just decide you're going to score it in the opposite direction. But what your people are actually saying is you're saying that people that are least unsatisfied with caregiving are satisfied with caregiving. And there actually there's a whole social psych literature that's actually kind of heading in the direction of negatively worded items. Sometimes are just really, really different than positively worded items. And it doesn't always make sense to put them in the same measure and just reverse the scoring and add them together. You have to, if you factor analyze something that has negative items and positive items, very typically, not always, but very typically, the positive items all go on one factor, the negative items all go on one factor. So they probably aren't the same underlying constructs. If you have another way of doing factor analysis is that you start off with conceptual ideas about what items ought to go together and or what subscales ought to go together for this larger, more abstract factor. And you can test that. Doing essentially the same kind of thing, but there's a confirmatory factor analysis way of approaching it. So you tell the program what you're looking for, and the program says, yeah, you're basically right. You get a whole bunch of different indicators that say, yeah, this is a good fit to the data, or it says, more typically, this is the real world and the way research tends to come out, it says, well, this isn't a very good fit to the data, but maybe if you threw these items out, or if you let error variance here, error variance there, or if you move these things around in a certain way, you might get a better fit, and so you can redesign things to get better fits. So these results that you get that are now rooted somehow in multiple scales or multiple items, right, are generally either referred to as factors because it's factor analysis, or latent variables because they're not the observed measures, the original measures, but they're kind of a latent, semi-hidden variable that is coming out from the analysis. Two different words for kind of the same thing. We'll probably actually get into this more, but the other kind of things that just kind of go on is like where you want to draw the line in terms of the number of factors, how many factor analyses you do before you get worried about how far away you are from the data. Because you might start off with a bunch of items, and you factor analyze the items and get subscales, and you still feel like you have too many subscales, so you factor analyze the factors to get higher order factors. And you kind of, you keep going long enough, you end up with either one, or you end up with uninterpretable analysis results. But you can kind of keep going at this until you get a very small number of things.
I'm sorry, can you repeat? The latent variables, they're semi-hidden, they come out in the analysis. How do you know what they are? Like what
It's the factor analysis. It's the factors. It's kind of another name for factors is latent variable.
Oh, okay.
And so you're saying that rather than calling it a factor, you're saying, okay, I've got out of all these coping items or all these coping subscales, I now have this latent variable of active coping and active coping loads on the subscales of active coping, problem solving, suppressing competing activities in the measure I use, and restraint coping, which means waiting for a better time. And you can get like avoidant coping and like denial. For some reason, emotional venting tends to end up on avoidant coping, and then there's a behavioral disengagement, and there's a cognitive disengagement. If substance abuse is part of substance abuse, tends to end up on avoidant coping practices. So now you're in your writing and the rest of your analyses that you're doing, looking at whatever else you're looking at in your study. Now instead of looking at each of these individual things, you're now saying, I've got this latent variable of avoidant coping that is how caregivers are trying to deal with the stresses of caring for a relative with dementia by avoidance, and it doesn't work well. People who try to do this get more burdened and more depressed and are less healthy and so on. So this is how the personality measures that we're going to be talking about in a couple of weeks all come out of factor analytic traditions. Depending on the particular original test, the higher order factors of intelligence that we're going to be talking about all come out of factor analytic traditions. Some of the original tests do too, and some of them come from more clinical ad hoc kind of traditions that think about factor analyzing is very similar to that. And so one of the things that you'll also notice is that about this point in the course we move from sort of like experimental cognitive aging research, trying to manipulate things, into more correlational answers to questionnaires kind of research, and then we get into kind of latent variables and how the latent variables relate to age, and how other things affect these latent variables and so forth. So get into the whole. Yes?
When you say personality scales, are you talking like sort of MMPI or more like...
Not so much MMPI. The NEO especially, Austin McRae's NEO is a lot of aging research is focused on, the clinical inventories